Emily Thompson had always prided herself on being organized. With 2 young kids, a demanding job, and a household to manage, staying on top of things was a necessity, not an option. It was a crisp Saturday morning, and while her husband Mark took the kids to soccer practice, Emily decided to tackle a pile of mail that had been accumulating on the kitchen counter. Most of it was the usual credit card offers, coupons, utility bills. But one envelope caught her eye. It was addressed to Mark and marked as private. Emily hesitated. She respected Mark's privacy, but they had always been open about finances, sharing accounts and discussing major expenses. Curious, she opened it, thinking it might be a routine bank statement or something requiring her attention. What she found inside, however, made her stomach tighten. The statement was from an account she didn't recognize. It detailed several monthly transfers, large sums of money sent to a name she knew all too well: Sarah Mitchell, Mark's ex-wife. At first, Emily tried to rationalize it. Perhaps it was child support. But that didn't add up. Mark had always been transparent about the agreed-upon amount, and these transfers far exceeded what was outlined in their divorce agreement. Besides, they had always handled child support through a designated legal process, not private transfers. She stared at the paper, her thoughts spiraling. Questions flooded her mind. Why would Mark send Sarah this much money? Why hadn't he told her? Was this some kind of emergency, or was there something else going on? Emily folded the statement neatly and placed it back in the envelope, as if trying to undo the moment she found it. She spent the rest of the morning pacing around the house, going through every scenario she could imagine. When Mark came home with the kids, the envelope still sat on the kitchen counter. Emily watched him carefully as he walked in, his face cheerful and relaxed. He gave her a kiss on the cheek and started chatting about the game, but she could barely focus. Finally, after the kids ran off to play, Emily cleared her throat. "Mark, can we talk for a minute?" He looked up from his coffee, his brow furrowing slightly. "Sure, what's up?" Emily picked up the envelope and held it out to him. "This came in the mail today." I opened it. Mark's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, just enough to make Emily's stomach drop further. He took the envelope, opened it, and glanced at the contents. Then he sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "It's not what you think," he said, his tone defensive. "I haven't said what I think yet," Emily replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "So why don't you explain?" Mark hesitated, clearly searching for the right words. Look, Sarah's had some financial trouble lately. I've been helping her out, for the kids' sake." Emily's heart sank. "You've been helping her out? Without telling me?" "Mark, we're supposed to make decisions like this together. How much trouble is she in that she needs this kind of money?" "It's not a big deal," he said quickly, his voice growing defensive. "She lost some work contracts, and I didn't want the kids to suffer because of it. I knew you'd get upset, so I didn't want to worry you." Emily felt a wave of anger rise in her chest. "Mark, this isn't just a little help. These are huge amounts of money, and you've been doing this for months. You didn't think I had a right to know?" "It's not like that," he said, his voice rising. "I'm doing this for my kids. Don't make it into something it's not." "For your kids? Or for Sarah?" Emily shot back, unable to keep the hurt out of her voice. Mark opened his mouth to respond, but their 6-year-old son ran into the kitchen, holding a drawing he'd made at school. The conversation came to an abrupt halt as they both turned to him, plastering on smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. Later that night, when the kids were asleep, Emily brought it up again. This time she tried to keep her tone calm. "Mark, I'm not saying you can't help Sarah if the kids need it. But this feels wrong. You didn't tell me. That's what hurts the most. We're supposed to be a team." Mark sighed heavily. "I'm sorry. I should have told you. I just didn't want to deal with the stress. Things have been tight lately, and I know how hard you've been working to save money. I didn't want to add to your plate." Emily wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe this was just a misunderstanding, that his intentions were purely about helping his children. But something about the way he avoided her gaze left her feeling uneasy. As she lay in bed that night, Staring at the ceiling while Mark slept beside her, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. She hated the doubt creeping into her mind, but the seed had been planted. For the first time in their marriage, Emily wasn't sure she trusted him. The uneasy feeling Emily had that night never left her. Days passed, and while she went through her routine dropping the kids off at school, juggling work deadlines, and running errands, her mind kept returning to that bank statement. Mark had apologized, but his explanation felt too convenient, too rehearsed. Emily wasn't the type to snoop, but the lingering doubt gnawed at her. She told herself it wasn't about being nosy, it was about protecting her family. The secrecy Mark had displayed, especially about something as significant as their finances, wasn't just a red flag, it was a warning siren. It was a quiet Wednesday evening when her suspicions deepened. Mark was in his office upstairs, supposedly working late. The kids were in bed, and Emily was cleaning up the kitchen when she heard the faint hum of Mark's voice. At first, she thought he was on a work call, but as she walked past the stairs, she heard a name that made her stop in her tracks. "Sarah, I'm trying, okay?" But Emily's starting to ask questions. Emily's heart froze. She stood there, rooted to the spot, straining to hear more. Mark's tone was low and urgent, the kind of voice he used when he didn't want to be overheard. I know. Look, I'll figure it out. Just don't call me at the house unless it's an emergency." Emily's chest tightened as she tiptoed back to the kitchen. Her hands shook as she picked up a glass of water, trying to steady her nerves. She felt a surge of anger, mixed with a sinking sense of betrayal. Whatever Mark was doing, it clearly wasn't as innocent as he'd claimed. The next day, Emily couldn't concentrate at work. The conversation she'd overheard replayed in her mind like a broken record. She needed to know the truth, but confronting Mark again without evidence felt pointless. He'd deny it, deflect, maybe even turn it around on her for spying. That evening, after Mark left for a late meeting, Emily made a decision. She sat down at their shared laptop and opened his email. They'd always shared passwords, it was a sign of trust when they first got married. But now, that trust felt fragile and one-sided. She typed in his password, her fingers trembling slightly. It worked. At first, there was nothing unusual: work emails, some subscriptions, a few promotional offers. But then she noticed an email chain buried under a label she hadn't seen before: personal. The subject line read urgent about the transfer. Emily clicked it, her pulse racing. The email was from Sarah, dated just a few weeks earlier. Mark. I really appreciate everything you've done for me. You're the only one I can rely on right now. But the $5,000 last month wasn't enough. I'm still short on rent, and the kids' tuition payment is overdue. Please, I need your help again. I hate asking, but I don't know what else to do. Sarah. Emily's stomach dropped as she scrolled through the thread. Mark had responded. Sarah. I'm doing everything I can, but it's getting harder to keep this from Emily. She's been asking questions and I can't risk her finding out. I'll send another $3,000 this week, but that's all I can do for now. Please don't call unless it's an emergency. Mark. Emily stared at the screen, her hands gripping the sides of the laptop. Her head spun with questions. Why was Mark sending Sarah such enormous sums of money? Rent? Tuition? None of this made sense. She kept digging, scrolling through older emails, piecing together a timeline. This wasn't a one-time thing, it had been going on for nearly a year. Every few weeks, Sarah would ask for more money, always with a heartfelt plea about the kids or some financial crisis. And Mark would comply, sometimes even offering more than she asked for. But it wasn't just the money that hurt, it was the tone of their conversations. Sarah's messages were warm, sometimes even flirtatious. She called him Marky, a nickname Emily had never heard before. The pit in Emily's stomach grew deeper. Was this just about money, or was there something more? The final blow came when Emily checked Mark's text messages. She knew it was an invasion of privacy, but at this point she felt justified. Most of their conversations were mundane work chats, reminders, updates about the kids. But then she saw Sarah's name. The most recent message read, "Thanks for today. I don't know what I'd do without you." Emily felt the tears sting her eyes. She slammed the laptop shut and sat there in the quiet kitchen, her mind racing. Mark wasn't just helping Sarah financially, he was keeping an emotional connection alive, one that felt far too intimate for comfort. That night, Emily barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the emails, the texts, the lies. She replayed every conversation she'd had with Mark in recent months, searching for signs she'd missed. The next morning, as she drove the kids to school, she felt like a zombie. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. The kids chattered in the back seat, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in their parents' marriage. When she got home, she sat at the kitchen table, staring at the bank statement she'd found days earlier. She had all the pieces now, but she still didn't know what to do with them. Should she confront Mark again? Should she reach out to Sarah directly? Or should she hire a lawyer and start preparing for the worst? Emily's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Mark's car pulling into the driveway. She quickly shoved the statement back into the drawer and plastered on a neutral expression as he walked in. "Hey," he said, kissing her on the cheek. "How was your morning?" "Fine," she replied, forcing a smile. But inside, she felt like a volcano about to erupt. Mark poured himself a cup of coffee, oblivious to the tension in the room. As Emily watched him, a new thought occurred to her. If she wanted the truth, she'd have to be strategic. Confronting him head-on hadn't worked before, and she doubted it would work now. Instead, she decided to play the long game. She'd gather more evidence, find out exactly what Mark was hiding, and then decide how to confront him in a way he couldn't deny or deflect. For now, she'd pretend everything was normal. But deep down, Emily knew the cracks in their marriage were growing wider by the day. Emily spent the next few days oscillating between simmering anger and quiet resolve. She was no stranger to conflict in her career as a project manager. She often had to mediate between clashing teams and soothe the egos, but this wasn't the office. This was her marriage, her family, and the stakes felt impossibly high. She knew she couldn't keep pretending forever. Each morning, as she sat across the breakfast table from Mark, her patience wore thinner. His cheerful demeanor, the casual way he asked her about her day, grated on her nerves. Every smile felt like a lie, every shared moment tainted by what she now knew. On Friday night, after the kids had gone to bed, Emily decided it was time. She'd thought about every possible way to approach the conversation, but ultimately, she realized there was no perfect script. It was going to be messy, and it was going to hurt, but she couldn't carry the weight of Mark's lies any longer. "Mark," she began, her voice steady but firm, "we need to talk." He was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. At her tone, he looked up, his brow furrowing slightly. "What's wrong?" Emily sat down across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She took a deep breath. "I know about the money you've been sending to Sarah." Mark froze. For a moment, he didn't say anything, his face a mask of surprise. Then he set his phone down and leaned forward. "Emily, I can explain." "No," she interrupted, holding up a hand. "You don't get to explain this away. I've seen the emails, Mark. I've seen the texts. This isn't just about helping your kids. This is about you lying to me, over and over again." His face reddened, and he shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I didn't lie to you. I just didn't tell you everything. There's a difference." Emily let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, really? Sending thousands of dollars to your ex-wife and hiding it from me isn't lying. What would you call it, then?" Mark rubbed his hands over his face, sighing deeply. "I didn't want to stress you out, okay? Sarah's been struggling, and I didn't want it to affect the kids." "That's all it is, Emily?" "I swear." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Don't you dare swear to me when I've already seen the proof. You've been giving her money for her rent, for her vacations. And those texts. Mark, I don't know what I'd do without you. What exactly is going on between you two?" At this, Mark's head snapped up. "There's nothing going on. Emily, you're making this into something it's not." "Am I?" she shot back, her voice rising. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks an awful lot like you're still playing the role of her husband. Meanwhile, I'm here, working overtime, budgeting every penny, making sacrifices for our family while you're secretly funding hers." "That's not fair," Mark said, his tone defensive. I'm doing this for the kids, not for Sarah. I know it looks bad, but you have to believe me. I was just trying to do the right thing." Emily shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. "The right thing? The right thing would have been being honest with me. The right thing would have been putting our family first. But you didn't. You lied, Mark. And now I don't even know if I can trust you." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Emily wiped her eyes, refusing to let the tears fall. Mark looked at her, his expression a mixture of guilt and frustration. "Emily," he said quietly, "I'm sorry. I should have told you. I just didn't want to cause a fight." "Well, congratulations," she said bitterly. "You caused one anyway." Mark leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "What do you want me to do? Cut her off completely? Leave the kids to suffer?" "I want you to stop hiding things from me," Emily replied. "If this is really about the kids, then fine, let's talk about it together. But this sneaking around, this secrecy, it's not okay, Mark. It's not how a marriage works." He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the floor. "You're right. I messed up. I was just trying to handle it on my own. But I see now that it was wrong. I should have been honest with you." Emily crossed her arms, her expression guarded. "Do you really mean that? Or are you just saying what you think I want to hear?" Mark looked up at her, his eyes earnest. "I mean it, Emily. I don't want to lose you. I'll stop sending Sarah money, and I'll show you everything, every email, every account. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." Emily wanted to believe him, but the wounds were still fresh. "It's not just about the money, Mark. It's about trust. And right now, I don't know if I trust you anymore." His face fell, and for the first time that night he looked truly remorseful. "I'll earn it back," he said quietly. "I'll do whatever it takes, Emily. I swear." She nodded slowly, not because she was ready to forgive him, but because she needed time to process everything. "We'll see," she said, her voice firm. "But this isn't something you can fix overnight, Mark. It's going to take time." As she stood up to leave the room, Mark reached out and gently touched her hand. "I love you," he said. Emily paused, looking down at him. "I hope so," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Then she walked upstairs, leaving Mark alone with his thoughts. In the quiet of their bedroom, Emily sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the photo of their family on the nightstand. She wanted to believe that Mark was telling the truth, that his intentions had been pure, even if his actions weren't. But a part of her couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more he wasn't saying. For now, she decided to give him the benefit of the doubt, but she also promised herself that she wouldn't let her guard down again so easily. If Mark wanted to rebuild their marriage, he'd have to prove himself, one step at a time. The days that followed Emily and Mark's confrontation were tense and uncomfortable. Mark tried his best to act as though things were normal, but Emily couldn't shake the feeling that their marriage had shifted into uncharted territory. The weight of the betrayal, financial and emotional, sat heavy in her chest, making even the simplest interactions with him feel strained. True to his word, Mark gave Emily full access to their accounts and emails. He stopped the money transfers to Sarah and even let Emily read through the rest of their correspondence. On the surface, it appeared as though Mark had nothing left to hide. But Emily's instincts told her otherwise. One evening, about a week after their confrontation, Emily received a call from her sister, Claire. "You sound exhausted," Claire said after they exchanged pleasantries. "I am," Emily admitted, sinking into the couch. "It's been a lot. Mark and I are trying to work through some things, but it's hard. Really hard." Claire hesitated before speaking again. "Em, I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I saw Sarah at the mall last week." Emily sat up straighter. "Sarah? What was she doing?" "She was shopping. And I mean shopping. Designer bags, new clothes, the kind of stuff that doesn't exactly scream financial trouble." "I thought it was strange, considering what you told me about her situation." Emily's mind raced. "Are you sure it was her?" "Positive. I even saw her talking to someone, a man. They looked cozy." Emily's stomach churned. "What kind of man?" "I don't know. Tall, dark hair, a little older than Mark, maybe. They seemed close, though, like more than friends. Emily thanked Claire and hung up, her thoughts spinning. If Sarah was truly in financial trouble, why was she splurging on luxury items? And who was the man she was with? That night after Mark went to bed, Emily sat in the living room, staring at her laptop. She'd promised herself she wouldn't let her guard down, and now she was glad she hadn't. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she debated her next move. Finally, she decided to dig deeper. She searched Sarah's name online, combing through social media profiles, news articles, anything that might give her more insight into what was going on. It didn't take long before she stumbled across something that made her heart stop. A photo posted on Sarah's Instagram 2 weeks earlier. Sarah, dressed in a sleek black dress, holding a glass of champagne, standing next to her, with his arm around her waist, was the man Claire had described. The caption read, "Emily felt the air leave her lungs. New beginnings? Love?" It was clear now that Sarah wasn't struggling, she was thriving. And worse, she'd been using Mark's money to fund her extravagant lifestyle with another man. The next morning, Emily confronted Mark with the evidence. She placed the printed-out photo on the kitchen table and waited for him to come downstairs. When he saw it, his face went pale. "What is this?" he asked, his voice unsteady. "You tell me," Emily replied, her tone icy. "Sarah seems to be doing just fine for someone who's supposedly struggling. Care to explain?" Mark sank into a chair, rubbing his temples. "I don't know what to say. I didn't know about this." "Didn't you?" Emily snapped. "Because it seems pretty convenient that she's out there celebrating while we're tightening our belts to send her money." "I swear." "Emily, I had no idea," Mark said, his voice desperate. "She told me she needed help. I believed her. I was just trying to do the right thing." Emily shook her head, tears of frustration welling in her eyes. "The right thing? Mark, you've been playing the fool while she's been laughing all the way to the bank. And you didn't just betray me, you betrayed us. Our family. Our future." Mark buried his face in his hands. "I don't know what to say. I screwed up. I thought I was helping. I didn't think." "No, you didn't," Emily interrupted. "And now we're here." The conversation ended with Mark promising to confront Sarah and demand answers. Emily agreed, but only because she wanted to see if he had the courage to follow through. That afternoon, Mark met Sarah at a coffee shop while Emily waited in the car, parked a few spaces away. She watched as they talked, her heart pounding with a mix of anger and anticipation. When Mark returned, his expression was grim. "She admitted it," he said, sliding into the passenger seat. "She said she didn't mean to take advantage of me, but things got out of hand. She promised to pay back the money." Emily stared at him, her jaw tightening. "Do you honestly believe her?" "No," Mark admitted, his voice heavy. "But it's over. I told her I'm done. No more money, no more favors. She's on her own now." For the first time, Emily saw a glimmer of the man she'd married, the man who had always tried to do the right thing, even when it wasn't easy. But the damage had been done, and she wasn't sure if their relationship could recover. In the weeks that followed, Emily and Mark began therapy. It wasn't easy, each session felt like peeling back layers of pain and resentment, but slowly they started to rebuild. Emily made it clear that trust wouldn't be given freely, it had to be earned. And Mark, for his part, committed himself fully to proving he was worthy of it. As for Sarah, she disappeared from their lives. The payments stopped, and Emily blocked her number from Mark's phone. Occasionally, Emily wondered if Sarah ever felt remorse for what she'd done, but she quickly pushed the thought away. Sarah was part of their past, and Emily was focused on the future. Months later, as Emily watched Mark playing with their kids in the backyard, she felt a sense of cautious hope. Their marriage wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was stronger than it had been before. They'd faced betrayal, anger, and heartbreak, but in the end they'd chosen to fight for each other. And while the scars of their ordeal would never fully fade, they served as a reminder of the lessons they'd learned about honesty, resilience, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. For Emily, that was enough.